The murmuring of the people. The wilderness was vast and unyielding, stretching like an endless canvas of rock and sand before the people of Israel. They had seen the mighty hand of God split the Red Sea and swallow Pharaoh's army. They had walked through dry ground where walls of water stood like fortresses beside them, yet now, in the heat and the monotony of the desert, those memories began to fade in the hearts of many. The first days after their deliverance were filled with joy and songs of praise. Miriam led the women with tambourines, and the people exalted the Lord, who had triumphed gloriously. But joy turned quickly into frustration, as thirst gnawed at their throats and hunger hollowed their stomachs. The desert was no place for millions to thrive, and every step became a trial of patience and faith. The murmuring began quietly at first. Whispers moved through the camp like a slow wind, subtle but growing stronger. People compared their present hardships with the life they had left behind in Egypt. Though Egypt had been a land of slavery, it was also a place of food and shelter. In the wilderness, freedom suddenly felt heavy, and gratitude gave way to complaint. Soon the voices rose louder, directed at Moses. "Why did you bring us here? Did you take us out of Egypt to let us die in the desert? At least there we had meat and bread. Here there is nothing but emptiness." Moses, burdened by their words, sought the Lord in prayer. His heart was weary, for though he had obeyed God, the people placed blame upon him. He stood between the cries of the multitude and the holy presence of God, interceding for those who did not see the bigger picture. God in his mercy heard Moses and answered. Bread from heaven fell with the dew each morning, and the people called it manna. Quail filled the camp in the evening, and water flowed from rocks when needed. Each miracle was a direct response to murmuring hearts. Yet instead of producing lasting gratitude, the provision often fueled new complaints. The people grew tired of manna, even though it sustained them. They longed for variety and flavor. Their words grew bitter, and the sound of discontent became constant. "We remember the fish we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our whole being is dried up, and there is nothing at all except this manna before our eyes." Their murmuring was not simply about food or drink. It revealed something deeper, a lack of trust in the God who had redeemed them. They saw the obstacles, but not the promises. They magnified discomfort, but forgot the power that had delivered them. Moses, overwhelmed by their constant complaining, cried out to the Lord again. "Why have you dealt with your servant? Why have I not found favor in your sight, that you lay the burden of all these people on me? I am not able to bear all these people alone, because the burden is too heavy for me." The Lord answered with compassion, but also with firmness. He appointed 70 elders to share the burden of leadership with Moses, placing his spirit upon them so they could help guide the people. God also provided meat in abundance, but with it came a warning. Their cravings would bring discipline, for their hearts had despised the Lord's provision. The camp learned through hardship that murmuring against God's chosen leader was murmuring against God himself. Yet time after time, as soon as circumstances became difficult, they forgot. When water was scarce, they quarreled again. When enemies threatened, they doubted his protection. Their voices became a chorus of dissatisfaction, echoing against the silent stones of the desert. At Meribah and Massah, their murmuring tested the Lord. They asked, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Though he had guided them with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, though his presence never left them, they still doubted his nearness. The murmuring reached its most dangerous height when spies returned from Canaan. 10 of the spies spoke words of fear, describing giants and fortified cities, while only Joshua and Caleb spoke with faith. The people wept loudly and raised their voices against Moses and Aaron, saying, "If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" They even talked of choosing a new leader to take them back to slavery. At that moment, their murmuring revealed open rebellion. They rejected the promise of God because they feared the challenge before them. Their complaints were no longer about bread or water. They were about the very mission God had given them. The Lord's anger burned. He had shown them his wonders, yet they did not believe. Because of their murmuring, the generation that left Egypt was condemned to wander 40 years in the desert until they perished, never seeing the promised land. Only Joshua and Caleb, who had trusted God, were spared. The story of Israel's murmuring became a lesson for generations. Prophets and psalmists recalled it, warning that hardened hearts and ungrateful spirits lead to ruin. The Apostle Paul would later remind believers not to murmur as Israel did, lest they fall under the same judgment. But the lesson was not only about punishment, it was also about God's patience and mercy. Again and again he provided despite their complaints. Again and again he forgave when they repented. His love remained steadfast, even when their words were harsh and their faith weak. Moses himself learned through their murmuring that leadership meant enduring misunderstanding and carrying the weight of others' dissatisfaction. He learned to seek God first, to pour out his frustrations in prayer instead of answering complaint with complaint. His example showed that when people grumble, leaders must stand firm, rooted in God's strength. The wilderness became a mirror for Israel's heart. Murmuring revealed their lack of trust, their fear, and their longing for comfort over calling. Yet God used the wilderness to shape them, to teach them that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from his mouth. Each story of murmuring, from the waters of Marah to the plains of Moab, carried the same truth. When faith falters, voices turn to complaint. When trust wavers, hearts return to Egypt. But when eyes remain on God, even deserts can become places of provision. The murmuring of the people is not only Israel's story, it is humanity's story. How often do hearts long for what was left behind, forgetting the slavery of sin? How often do mouths complain in the face of hardship, forgetting past deliverance? How often do people question whether God is truly present, though he has promised never to leave? The call is clear. Murmuring must give way to trust. Complaints must turn into prayers. Fear must yield to faith. For the same God who provided manna, quail, and water from the rock still provides today. The rock that followed them was Christ, and from him flows living water that satisfies forever. In the end, the desert murmurs became warnings etched in history. They remind us that gratitude guards the heart and trust sustains the soul. They remind us that even when the journey feels barren, the Lord is present. And they remind us that murmuring leads to wandering, while faith leads to promise. So the story of the murmuring people lives on, not just as a record of Israel's struggles, but as a call to each generation to trust rather than complain, to remember rather than forget, to believe rather than doubt. For the God who led them through the wilderness is the same God who leads us still.